Welcome to the Better Student Ministry podcast, where we take a deep dive into practical youth ministry topics to help you and your team become better at what God has called you to do. We're joined now by your hosts, Mark and Jared, who together have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
Hey everybody, welcome to Better Student Ministries. So glad to be back, glad to be here. It's another day. It's a beautiful day, Mark.
It is. It is. In fact, we want to wrap this up so we can go swim in your pool.
Yeah, guys. If we could hurry this along, production crew.
Yeah.
No.
Billy behind the glass.
Billy behind the glass. Oh man, we're excited to be back. Excited to dive into another topic of youth ministry. Today we want to talk about making the most of Hangouts. And I have one of my great friends. He's a Cal missionary. His name's Andy Estrella. I'll give him a shout out. He said, never underestimate the power of a hangout. And I think that's really true in youth ministry, in particular in disciple making. And so today we want to take some time, do a little deep dive into Hangouts. Mark, I know you love to hang out. What is your, before we dive into the content, what's your favorite hangout? Like if you could create the ideal hangout, what would it be?
What am I doing?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm there, of course.
Yeah, right. As I referenced earlier, it's if I'm in water, if I can be submerged like up to my chin in water, that is a good day.
Okay.
I think maybe some of it is because I'm a big guy and water supports a lot of my weight.
I feel so free in the water.
And then it's just the fresh feeling. And it does and that doesn't matter whether it's cold out or warm out. Like obviously the temperature of the water will change. So if it's a hot day, I'm in some cool water, and if it's a cold day, little hot tub action. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know. I like being in water. It's weird.
That is weird.
Thinking about it.
You're kind of like Aquaman.
Yeah.
Well, good.
And by that I meant like in a library, just really dissecting some books, thinking deep.
I thought you were going to say, going deep dive into some theology, some good,
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I love playing sports. So for me, it's like I love playing basketball or with friends or maybe a little video games. I've recently been getting into Fortnite with my kids.
Yeah.
So have retouched this childhood of mine that loves video games. So
there's a part of me that always wished I could get into them, but I get motion sick, which is totally lame.
Could you sound any older?
I know.
Kid, you turn that off. Daddy's getting sick over here. Well, today we want to dive into the idea of Hangouts and really in youth ministry, how do we make the most of them? And you and I were talking about this. We think it's important because a lot of people don't think intentionally about Hangouts. They kind of think like, oh, it's just a byproduct, or maybe they don't think about them at all. Maybe they don't happen at all. And we want to encourage you to say, not only are they important and they should happen, but there's a way in which you can make the most out of the Hangouts that happen within your youth ministry. And so I want to start off with one of the thoughts that I had when it comes to this idea of making the most of our Hangouts is the idea of being strategic about who we invite. This kind of sounds like, what? Can you really say that? That you're excluding certain people, right? But the reality is, when I look at the model, here's the reality: we can't invite everybody to every single hangout. And in fact, the model that I want to follow in making disciples, the model of Christ, is He did hang out the masses, He did hang out the crowds, but the majority of His time was spent with a select few. And I don't think we should be afraid to think that way in ministry, and in particular in making disciples, of who am I inviting, and am I being strategic about this? And so one of the things that I would try to do as a youth pastor when I was doing these Hangouts, and for me, like I would do a lot of basketball or invite people into my home or whatever, I would think about a couple of things. The first one would be, what students can I invite to this that are disengaged? So they're not been around, that kind of, I'm not really sure, or maybe they're kind of those fringe students that you're like, I want to move them into that next phase of being more committed. So what are those couple of students I can invite? Now, I don't want to invite only those students, because that, and I'll share why in a second, but I don't want to not invite any of those students, because this is an opportunity to maybe move them to being more engaged. So I would think about who are those couple of students, and then I would think about who are the students that I can invite that are really engaged. And my point of that was to hopefully get them connected with the disengaged students. So it's a little bit of a moment for me to continue to pour into those ones who are engaged, because we shouldn't assume just because they're really committed and engaged that they will stay that way if we don't keep pouring in. But it's also a moment for me to help them think missionally. Like oftentimes I'd have a conversation with them before the hangout to be like, hey, just so you know, John's going to be here. And like I'll try to connect with him, try to pour into him. So I would think about trying to match those disengaged and really engaged. And then the last piece I would think about is, what adult leaders can I invite who need to see what it's like to do a hangout properly? And this is really important because sometimes we assume all of our leaders know how to hang out with students. It's just not the case. Some of them are awkward. Some of them think every hangout should be a Bible study. Some of them think you should never have spiritual conversations on a hangout. So for me, I would think, okay, I'm not only discipling students, I'm also discipling leaders. So this is a moment I can invite some leaders and model to them what this looks like.
Yeah, I think I like that idea. And I think maybe a way to help decipher what you were saying too is to kind of put these two words to it. There is a difference between being intentional and being exclusive, right? You're not suggesting let's be exclusive, although that can sometimes be the feel when you say, hey, there's going to be certain students that I may target. But so where you need to be aware of the difference between being intentional and being exclusive is there's a reason behind what it is that you're doing. And a bad reason would be, I don't really want to hang out with those kids, right? Like that becomes exclusive. And the sad reality is there will be people that could feel that way. And it's usually actually mom or dad observing from the outside who may think, oh, Pastor Mark or Pastor so-and-so is exclusive. And they spend all their time with these students and they're missing my student or missing this piece or that sort of thing. I think that's important for you to be aware of. I think it's feedback that if you're given it, you need to consider and think, okay, is this student being missed? And I think it could be an opportunity for a teaching time as well, both for the student and for their parent, if they feel like the youth ministry is exclusive versus intentional.
Yeah.
If it's not intentional, you're not going to be able to give a reason for why it feels like it could be exclusive, though it's not.
And this is one of the main reasons why we need to always be recruiting and developing leaders.
Absolutely.
Because if you and I are two leaders, we can afford to be exclusive with a certain group of kids as long as the other one is covering another group of kids.
Absolutely.
Right? For us to both hang out with all the kids in like a mediocre way doesn't help them versus you and I hang out with a certain group of kids in a more strategic way.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the leaders and you have a youth group of 30 kids and you're only ever hanging out with 10 of them, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if you develop a big enough team, guess what? All those 30 and more are getting covered and getting pursued and loved on.
And as you're thinking about your team as well, so if you're the point leader for your youth ministry, absolutely, I'm going to say you need to make sure you find intentional time to connect with every student in your ministry at some point, right? It might not be as much time with every student, but as the point leader, there has to be some relationship with each student. But even more important is that idea of I need to bring other leaders to the table, other healthy adults to the table. And what's also equally important to consider is you need to invite other adults to the table that aren't just like you, that aren't your personality.
Yeah, that's huge.
Most youth pastors that I know have really big, really outgoing personalities, which is totally fine. I think there's just something about youth ministry that attracts that type of personality. Not that there aren't youth pastors that are more introverted, but some of your quieter students may be intimidated by that big personality and might not connect or engage as intentionally as they may with a youth leader that is more like their personality and will do the things that they want to do as well.
Right. Yeah, we had this. I feel like I'm a pretty versatile person in the sense that I can hang out with almost anybody, but we all have certain passions and things that we're into. And so one of the things that I loved about youth ministry is getting to recruit a diverse staff, not just ethnically diverse, although we had that, but we lived in Long Island, so it's pretty diverse, but diverse in their passions. Because this is a great point. Like, we had students that they were not athletes, they were not into sports, some of the stuff that I love to do. Maybe they weren't into music, which some of our leaders were really passionate about that. and they were into like different type of either video games or certain kind of card games and stuff. And so to be able to recruit leaders that were as passionate about those things as them, all of a sudden it just was this whole connection point with these students that I'm thinking to myself, okay, for me, I'd have to work at like a 400% to connect with that student. Where this leader, it's just their default because they're equally as passionate about it. And there was this deep connection that I could never have with them. And so that's the beauty. That's hard to do because a lot of times those people, like you said, you won't naturally click with, or because you don't share their interest, you may be tempted to not value their interest as much. But for you, like, what was there a strategic way that you did this in recruiting leaders, or were you just kind of like, hey, I'm open to anybody as long as they're willing to serve the way that we want them to serve?
Yeah, one of the things that I think was a big help for me was certainly my wife, because she and I are very different personality-wise. I think, not necessarily the whole opposites attract thing, but like we just happen to think differently about things. So she would help me frame and take a look at our staff and be like, I think my natural personality attracted certain types of adult leaders, but her helping and reminding me, you need to look for people that aren't you. And the big win being their strengths cover my weaknesses and vice versa. Yeah. My strengths cover theirs. And so as you take a look at the dynamic of your team, you can also look at the population of your students, and that may help you identify as well who it is that might be missing at the table. So like if it goes too long with a certain personality type of leaders, your group becomes that, right? If it's all a bunch of goofball, crazy, wild leaders, your youth group becomes that, and you miss the opportunity to reach a group of students that are maybe a little uncomfortable in that environment or aren't there. And I think that's a big miss when you're trying to keep the net as wide as possible and be intentional about catching those students that are in your community.
Yeah. So the first point would be intentional about who you invite to the Hangouts. That's a key, and really leverage those moments. Understand how important they are. They're not just a simple like whatever. It really matters, and there's an opportunity for you there. So as you thought about this, I knew you kind of had a separate point that you were thinking about. So what came to your mind as you were thinking about making the most of Hangouts?
Yeah, so when we're talking about Hangouts, we're not though they can be a part of your large group gathering, like, we always had an intentional time at the very beginning to connect and hang out, and just, it's a more open time flow, or even part of your small groups, there's hangout time that can be built in. But we're actually talking about intentional outside of your programming, hanging out, sharing life with students. And so for one of the things that was really important for me in our ministry, and me in my own life in general, was what are those non-structured hangout times? And when I look at my calendar and my schedule, I'm like, oh my goodness. First of all, I've got so many things that are already on my schedule for ministry stuff. Then we've got all of our events that are on the schedule. How am I going to add another layer? Well, first of all, I recognized that those relational hangouts were important, so I had to figure out strategically how to place them in. And the place that made the most sense, and then ultimately just had a lot of really good growth, was just having them added to our schedule, added to our life, my wife's life and our family's life. And so there were certain times that made sense to just bring a student along, or a group of students along with us as we did our day-to-day life. So I mentioned in the video, like, I like eating, and I do that at least 3 times a day. And so I'm already doing that. Why not bring a student along with me and say, hey, let's go grab a bite to eat. I'm going to be eating anyway, so it's not like I'm having to change my routine to add that. Or we would invite students and leaders to our house to come hang out with us, and we would invite them specifically early to, like, while we're making dinner, to come and hang out and make dinner with us, or hang out with us while we're just living life. And one of the really cool side effects of that was those students and those leaders got to see what life looked like for Melissa and I outside of the church, which I think sometimes people can perceive, oh, well, they're so nice and kind to each other in the church because you can't have us rip-roaring fight in the middle of church, but they can begin to see, what does our dynamic actually look like in our own home? What does the dynamic look like with our kids and interacting with our kids and dealing with their life in the midst of our ministry and things like that? And so, hey, I got to run to the store. I got to pick up something at the store. Why don't you come along with me? And so they're joining my life. And I think there's something really neat about that invitation into their life versus it feeling like, oh, they have to talk to me on Wednesday night because it's ministry time.
Yeah, I think this is so important, and I love what you're saying, because number one, it takes some pressure off. This is not stuff that you have to overly plan. That's the whole point of what you're saying, is invite them into your life. And part of the reason I think sometimes the whole idea of Hangouts becomes stressful for people is they feel like, gosh, it's this whole big thing I got to plan out, and how do I do it? How do I have all the right stuff? But this is like, no. Literally, what are you doing? Invite them to come hang. You don't need to give them a rundown of all the stuff you're going to do. It's like, hey, why don't you just come over? And whatever happens, and they get to see what life looks like. And that's part of disciple making, is you're modeling to them, if you're a man, what does it look like to be a man? If you're a woman, what does it look like to be a woman? What does it look like to be a parent or a husband or a wife? And so this was a game changer for my wife and I, for both our students and our leaders. And for a while, I kind of had the view that ministry was like a 9-to-5, and I felt very protective of my family, because I heard a lot of these horror stories, and rightly so, right, of older pastors who were like, I sacrificed my family for ministry, don't do it. And so for me, it was like, all right, ministry is 9-to-5, and then it's family time, and these are two separate worlds. And I came to realize that's not working. Like, if I don't invite these people into my life, there's this big piece missing. And to my amazement and surprise, as I did that, it didn't hurt my family. It actually helped my family. Like, the more I invited people in and the more I opened up my family, like, it was cool. My kids started to see young adults and teenagers around our table talking about God, talking about spirituality, joking and laughing. My kids started to realize this is what our family does. We don't just live for us. We live for people. We're a family on mission. And I started to realize this is not hurting them. This is helping them. Now, I'm not saying it can't be unhealthy, but I think today, if we're not careful, the idea that ministry could just be a 9-to-5 and that people do not need to be invited into our life is a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think that just boils down to having some wisdom and discernment, right? Like, if the kid is calling you at 11 o'clock at night, you can discern pretty quickly whether this is something I need to engage with them, or I can say to them, hey, I see this is a big deal to you. Let's plan on talking about this tomorrow at such and such a time. And I mean, in general, in ministry, if you're going to get close to people, not even just in ministry, that's just called loving and caring for people, there is some interruptions to your flow and your schedule of life, but then there also has to be balance involved as well. And one of the great things, one of my youth leaders in my youth group, one of the things that he held so precious in his discipleship process growing up is he had an adult youth leader in his life that worked on cars, and he'd be like, hey, I got to do the brakes on my car. Why don't you come hang out? And he got to come and hang out with that adult leader, and he got to like learn some really cool stuff. Like, he learned how to put brakes on his car, but while they're hanging out and talking, they're getting to know each other. They're sharing about their life. And, guys, I think, are shoulder to shoulder, relationally. We connect more shoulder to shoulder, doing tasks together, things like that. Not that there aren't important times to do face-to-face relationship stuff as well. That tends to work better with females relationally. But like he's like, we would hang out for an afternoon, and 3 hours would come and go. The leader had to do that anyways because he had it on his schedule to do it. But man, how much more beneficial was that time that student was with him? He was learning something neat practically as well as having a cool relationship time. And those moments for that leader was one of the reasons why he wanted to get into youth ministry as well. He recognized the influence and the opportunity that healthy adults have in being able to shape the spiritual formation of teenagers.
Yeah, that's so true. One of my great friends, they're Chi Alpha missionaries, and which is college ministry, and they mimic that so well. He's the same thing, works on cars, and he builds a lot of homes and stuff, and he's constantly inviting guys. And most of the time, these are guys that they don't have any skills in that type of stuff, but they want to hang out. They're coming to hang out, and they're learning, and they're learning lessons about things like hard work. What it means to work hard, what it means to fix stuff, and just simple things. But they're having conversation, they're laughing, they're joking. All along the way, they're doing those things together and making memories, and that's the stuff at the end of the day. Like when your students get ready to graduate from youth ministry, it's the memories they made with the leaders and the students that poured in their lives, those moments with God that they had together that are going to be the lasting impact.
That's the power of the hangout, right? That's the reason why finding that time and that rhythm in your ministry is so important. Yes, preaching the gospel and teaching from the Bible, all that stuff is essential in ministry. You wouldn't have a ministry outside of it. But if you want to open up someone's heart to receive that stuff, then there is something about the hangout. There's something about the personal life attention that removes layer after layer of built-up defense mechanism and shows I care about you. And the things that I'm saying are not just wag my finger at you. These are the things you need to learn. It's because I care so much about you. I care also too much to not tell you about who Christ is and how he can transform your life and how he makes our lives have purpose and meaning and value. And I'm modeling that to you by letting you join my life.
And to not tell you when you're being an idiot. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That gives you the opportunity to say that.
For sure.
Well, before we close out, I do want to ask you one other question. We've talked a lot about Hangouts in the sense of hang out with students. But give me a sense, I know this is really important to you and also to me in youth ministry, the power of hangouts with leaders.
Sure.
And that aspect of ministry, when it's no students, it's just you and leaders. What are some of the things you did, some things you learned over your years in youth ministry?
One of the things that I think probably had one of the greatest impacts on our leadership development was we had twice a month we had staff meetings, and we had them in our house. Thankfully, we didn't have big houses. This wasn't like, we have a huge house, so let's invite everyone over. No, in fact, twice a week, we moved the furniture in the living room because we couldn't all sit in the dining room together. And so the table extended into the living room. But inviting them into our house was a big deal. It's not just meeting at the church for our meetings and this is business when we're here and it's not when we're not. And so spending time together on those staff meetings, yes, it was another thing on the calendar for our leaders, but I have to admit most of them would probably say those were their favorite things they did in youth ministry, and there weren't even students with us, but it was us sharing life together. It was us as a team rallying together. Hey, here's our mission. It's youth ministry and seeing students' lives transformed by the gospel. And so we would get together, we would eat dinner together, and then we would use something like the Better Student Ministry video series that's so great out there that I'm hearing so much about.
I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah. And so then we would watch a video together and debrief together.
And then use the discussion questions that are included in it.
Amazing.
Wow.
So
what a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was careful about, okay, here's our start time, here's our stop time for those who had things going on a particular night. But so the business would officially end at we would get together from 5:30 to 7:30, and we would officially be done the meeting at 7:30 or whatever the time was. But then we were never like, okay, we're done. See you guys, tomorrow night when we get together for a youth group. Okay, we're done with the meeting. Those who need to leave knew that was an exit point, and then most of them or a lot of them would then just hang out with us for the evening, and it was it may have been awkward at first for them and for us, but then it became so normal. Okay, 8:30 comes, there's still adult leaders hanging out in our house, which we were okay with, but I would break away because I got to go put the kids down, and feel free to just hang out and chat with with my wife or with each other. We'll be back down in 15 minutes when our kids are down. And so we're, they're seeing us put our kids down, and they're seeing that interaction, and we were okay with it, and it made sense for us at the time. But we were sharing life together, and then we were just chatting and hanging out after the fact.
Yeah. So here's an idea for you if you're looking for practical ideas. This is one of the most impactful things that I did as a youth pastor is with our adult leaders is we decided that we were going to do a movie marathon with some of our guy leaders. So I got 5 or 6 of our guy leaders at my house. My wife and kids were at her parents' house. And so we did all 3 Hobbit movies and then all 3 Lord of the Rings movies. It was 15 and a half hours.
You were popular guys, huh?
We were all all into it, but you can do whatever you want. But I'm telling you, the memories made that night and that are still talked about years later. Like that was one of the most impactful, just like amazing relationship building connection time. And so it doesn't always have to be you sitting down and strategically talking about the plan. Sometimes it's just you loving them, doing life with them, letting them know you care about them. If you create a culture that your leaders feel like they're family, and that only happens through Hangouts, they'll do anything for you. They'll fight for you. They'll fight for those kids, those students. What I would encourage you to youth pastors, if you don't have this built into your rhythm of ministry, you're missing a big part, a big key.
One of the things I loved because of the way that we shared life together was when there was an obstacle or something big that happened in our life, like that text thread that was quote unquote the youth leader text thread was where we were posting stuff like, "Hey man, pray for me. This is going on right now." Or like we were the first that we would turn to because we were such a support system for one another and sharing life together for each other, and that's big. When you're investing the amount of time and energy into youth ministry that a lot of youth ministries do, you're logging a ton of hours together. If you don't have quality relationships with each other, you're going to burn out fast, and there won't be that longevity for sure.
Hey, never underestimate the power of a hangout, guys.
Or the Lord of the Rings. Or the Lord of the Lords.
Listen, these students now don't even know what the Lord of the Ring, Fellowship of the Ring, any of it is.
That's so sad.
It's a terrible time.
I asked a kid about Braveheart the other day. No idea. I was like, where have we gone wrong?
We're failing.
God, where are you?
Lord, I don't want to question if you're not real, God, but this kid doesn't know what Braveheart is. So, we've got a lot of work to do in youth ministry, that's for sure.
Some more hangout marathons with our students. That's what we're recommending for Hangouts.
Thanks, guys, for being with us. We'll see you next time on the next Better Student Ministries.
Thanks so much for listening to the Better Student Ministry podcast. If you enjoyed today's content, be sure to check out our 10-minute training videos and discussion guide for you and your team. You can find those on YouTube and Facebook by searching Better Student Ministry. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what topics you would like covered. You can also email us at betterstudentministry@gmail.com.